Greetings and welcome. My name is Ryan O'Rourke from Stay Creative Painting. I truly hope you enjoy today's 10-minute painting. And if you have any questions or inquiries regarding today's tutorial, please leave me a comment in the comment section down below or send me a message over on the Facebook page. I'm always here and happy to help. Speaking of help, if you'd like assistance with the drawing process, I also offer the digital sketch for this 10-minute painting lesson and many others over on the Patreon page, in addition to reference photos and over a dozen hour-long painting lessons as well. So if any of that interests you, go check it out. Again, I am here to help. And now let's jump into today's 10-minute painting lesson. We are going to begin here today with a medium-sized, damp, square-headed brush. I'm using the square-headed brush because it can carry a good amount of paint, which is great for painting large areas, and it's damp. It has that additional water on it to ensure that I can extend the wet life of my paint so that it stays wet longer, and so that I can drag it out much farther than I normally would have been able to. Now, speaking of the paint, here I'm beginning with about an equal mixture of titanium white and primary blue. I applied that to the center of the painting where I want my moon to be and my glow to be. Then I went back to my palette, grabbed a bit of additional primary blue, mixed that in, and began working on the outskirts of that initial application, semi-blending the two together. Now, here I'm being fairly rough, and I'm going to continue being fairly rough because you have a couple of options when you're creating a sky in the night like this. You can make a very smooth sky, so the sky is essentially void of stars or clouds or anything like that. And if you want to do that, I'd simply implore you to just use a very soft touch of your brush on the canvas. That way you're not dragging the paint all about, and have a good amount of paint on the canvas. That way you don't kind of scrape it into the canvas and run out and have thinner areas. However, that isn't your only option. You could also create a sky full of strokes and streaks. It'll be much more dynamic, it'll be much more Van Gogh, and it can be really interesting. But you also have the third option, which is to create a sky full of stars. And that's what I'm going to do for this one. And it's going to involve not a brush stroke, but a brush tapping effect, which I'll get to in a little bit. But first I need to ensure that the entirety of the sky is full of wet paint, and essentially the colors and values that I want it to be. So here I'm going back and I'm adding some additional brush strokes to the middle. I added some darker pigment to the left and the right hand side, creating a vignette. It was about an equal mixture of Mars black and primary blue. But here now I'm blending everything into not a smooth application, but one that moves out in a fairly regulated gradient. So I have that bright pigment in the middle. It's not kind of off to the left, it's not kind of off to the right. It's right where I want it, and I'm kind of just reworking it until I get that. Now I should be able to go back and blend with it because of the water that we used initially. That will keep it wet for a much greater amount of time. And if you find that it does start to dry, or that the darker pigments that you apply around the outskirts of the sky kind of consume it to a point, you can always take more of that titanium white, more of that primary blue, apply it back into that middle area as I'm doing here, and then begin blending it out yet again. You're not stuck if you accidentally add too many dark pigments. You're not stuck if you add too many light pigments. Acrylic paints are so malleable, and you can always just add darker colors or lighter colors if you need to. Here's just a quick example of what you could achieve if you wanted to get more of a nicely blended gradient in the sky. But again, that isn't really the look I'm going for. I just thought I'd include it because I thought it would be interesting. Now, from there, I'm going to switch over to an older square-headed brush. As you can see, the bristles kind of leaf off in varying directions, so when I make a tapping motion just like this, I get these hundreds of little implications on the canvas. They're so small you wouldn't be able to make it with a regular brush or a regular tapping motion, and it's because each individual bristle is making an implication on the canvas. Now I'm starting from the center of that light, and then I'm working my way out all around, and I'm kind of working in this circular motion. That way I don't go to the outskirts and then bring those dark colors back into the middle for the most part. Now it's also that contrast of the light pigment next to the pigment that's slightly darker to it that's going to create the effect of stars. It's going to make like all of these very bright little pieces are shining through, and it's quite subtle in this one, as you can see, but it does add this extra level of detail. It does make it look like there is something very far away and very vast. It's really interesting, and it can be a lot of fun. It's a very cathartic process because it's really difficult to do wrong, and you're just kind of tapping along and seeing this beautiful effect being rendered on your painting. Now, it's worth noting that you can make an old square-headed brush very simply. If you don't have one, just peel back the bristles on a square-headed brush until it looks a little bit disheveled, and you have just what you need. Then I'm switching over to a smaller round-headed brush. I'm adding a lot of water to it, a little bit of titanium white paint. I'm peeling back the bristles and I'm launching some paint at the canvas. This is going to create a whole nother series of stars. These are going to look closer to us, and it's going to look much more interesting. All of these stars are going to be fairly different from the one next to them just via the application process, and yet again we're going to be making implications that are so small that you just couldn't make with a regular tapping effect of a brush. Then I threw in essentially where I wanted my moon. Because the sky is still wet, I can't get that pure bright color yet, but I essentially just plotted it so I knew where to apply it later once the sky was dry. Then I'm taking my medium-sized square-headed brush, I'm plotting in some mountains on my horizon. I'm taking about an even mixture of my primary blue, Mars black, and titanium white for that first application. Then I'm taking an even mixture of Mars black and primary blue for the second application, just because I felt like it was a little bit too bright and it blended in with the sky to too great of an extent. It's great when everything's cohesive and it looks like the light is shining down on everything and everything matches accordingly, but sometimes you can kind of lose the detail and interest in the piece. So sometimes things like that need to be heightened, and that's essentially what I did right there. Then I switched to the larger square-headed brush. I grabbed an even mixture, yet again, of titanium white and primary blue. I applied that to the center of our water here, our marsh. Then I grabbed, again, an even mixture of Mars black and primary blue. I applied that to the right and the left-hand side, and then I began to blend them all in together. I'm using a very soft brush stroke. That way, as I blend them together, I still have that nice bright pigment in the middle of the water, as you can see. But if you find that you lose it, you can always take that additional bright pigment and work it back in. Again, you aren't stuck if you do too much of one or the other, and it can be good to experiment and just kind of see what you like. We're all going to be a little bit different with that. Now, as you can see, I'm taking a smaller square-headed brush and I'm going to create some bulrushes. I'm just creating the silhouette of them. They're very close to us. They're very far away from that light, so they're not going to be receiving any highlight. We're not going to see their innate coloring, but they really will stand out. Now, this is the only actual black that we're using in this painting. We mixed black into parts of the sky, into parts of the water, into parts of the mountains, but it was never just a pure black, so it doesn't stand out to the same extent, and we're able to create a lot of depth. Generally, in paintings, you want the foreground to be the most stark, which means it has the most heavy values, the brightest of brights or the darkest of darks. It'll change depending upon day scenes or sunset/night scenes, but it's a good rule to work off of, and in this we're able to create a lot of depth by having those bulrushes be a complete black. Then I'm switching back over to the medium-sized square-headed brush. I have a good amount of titanium white, a little bit of primary blue, and I'm creating this reflection in the water, as you can see here. I started with this very bright pigment in the middle. I created them via a lot of horizontal strokes. Then I went back and I started grabbing the edges of them and blending them into the water with a very soft touch, as you can see right here. That way the middle of the reflection is the brightest and the edges begin to dissipate and get darker as we move to both the right and the left hand side. Now, if you accidentally grab too much paint or you found that the initial application blended too much with the wet underlayer, then you can always go back and add in additional highlights, as I'm doing right here. I'm also trying to use the corner of my medium-sized square-headed brush because it's very sharp, it's very fine. It's almost like using a liner brush with a little bit of additional support. So you can really do a lot with this brush. You can use it to cover large areas, but you can also use it to create straight lines, but you can also use the corner to create very detailed, sharp little applications as well. So while it's great to have a bunch of different brushes for different situations, recognize that a brush isn't limited to a single type of application and that you can really do a lot with it. Now, with that said, I'm going to take my smaller square-headed brush and I'm going to create some grass on the left and right-hand side, further creating this vignette effect. As you can see, the top left and right-hand corners are fairly dark. The bottom left and right-hand corners are now also going to be fairly dark, and we're going to create this effect that draws the viewer eye into the center of the painting. As we know, the eye is naturally and innately drawn to the brightest portion of any piece, and we're just ensuring that that is the center of the painting. That way it doesn't wander off to the left or right hand side of the painting and kind of move out of frame. So I have some consciously, again, just directing the viewer's eye. Now I'm going back and applying some additional applications to my bulrushes, just making sure they're nice and stark. With that said, that is essentially what we ended up with at our 10-minute painting. As per usual, I had a couple extra ideas. I thought I'd throw some extra time on the clock and just share those with you via speed painting. So I hope you enjoy this little portion as well. Right now, I'm just going to take a little bit of this extra white highlight and apply that to the water, as you can see. And I'm just moving it out, again, trying to ensure that that middle area is as bright as it can possibly be and that I get as much of a transition as possible. Then I'm taking a medium-sized round-headed brush. I'm applying some additional light to that middle area, blending it out with my finger. That way it looks like it's fairly ethereal and transparent. Then I added some additional highlights back into the moon. Now that it's dry, I can get that pure white. And I switched over to the smaller round-headed brush to create some clouds as well. This is done with about an even mixture of that titanium white and primary blue. And I'm moving my brush in horizontal strokes, but I'm also incorporating a little bit of a rounded motion as well. That way we get this fluffy cloud-like shape. It's important to note that all of your clouds should be different. Some of them should be more transparent than others, and that you want them to always look like they're evolving. With that said, that is our 10-minute version, our 13-ish minute version. I truly hope you enjoyed. I hope you feel like you've learned something. If you'd like to learn more, there is a link in the description to my ebook, Acrylics for Beginners. In it, we talk about how to blend our paint, what brushes to use, how to wrap light around subjects to create depth, all of the things you need to know about before you begin your first acrylic painting. Also, if you like lessons like this, but longer, where I also show you my color palettes when I'm mixing with water, all of those things that we don't have time for in this lesson, there is a link in the description to my Patreon, where you can find hour-long lessons, reference photos, and digital sketches of lessons just like this. So go check it out if you're interested. Thank you so much. I post multiple times each and every week, so hit that subscribe button, hit that bell button, and I will see you soon. Thank you to everyone for supporting and producing this show. I will see you soon, and above all, as always, stay creative.